This video is part 2 of my coverage of Chapter 13, Yoga and the Hindu Tradition. In this section, we will be talking about the various forms of yoga. They vary in terms of their emphasis on various practices, but they share the commonality of some of the basic beliefs that I covered in part 1 of the lecture. So we'll start with the yoga of action, which is also called karma yoga. The emphasis here is frequently described as being focused on what people do. So as is the case in a lot of traditions that are also considered to be faith traditions, there is an emphasis on what kind of conduct is associated with a well-lived life. So we start with the recommendation that people are to behave in a way that is selfless, that is avoiding an egocentric approach. The assumption is that living a well-lived life, living a good life, means that you are not attached in a very egoic way to your own success or the avoidance of failure. Instead, you are moving in a selfless direction. The karma yogi, so this would be a practitioner of karma yoga who is knowledgeable, wants to use yoga to serve others. And the expectation is that this person will behave in a way that is based on high standards. Those standards suggest that people are to live selflessly and avoid selfishness. Frequently, and we'll see this when we study the next chapters in Buddhism, in many of these traditions, there's a focus on not behaving in a way that is egoic, that is showing attachment to the successes and failures of this life. That shows an egoic obsession with pleasure and avoidance of pain, for example. So there's an expectation that you'll learn to live a life that is not emphasizing pride, that doesn't involve laziness. And there is an expectation that your practice of karma yoga will require discipline and commitment. So the practitioner of karma yoga, there isn't an expectation of a particular spirituality. It's really about how you behave. So it's not so much, going to temple or going to church or believing in a particular version of God or being religiously committed. It's more about how you live your life. And the practice of yoga is associated with cultivating life lived in that particular way. Now, this is a video giving a little more nuance to karma yoga.
Most people cannot meditate unless they exhaust the karma of activity within themselves. The prarabdha karma is like a coiled up spring. It has to find its release. If you don't give it constructive work, it will find release in all kinds of perversions. It is like a coiled up spring. Within this lifetime, it has to release itself. And considering all the risks that are there to physical life, your physical form is never really safe. Any moment it can get crushed under something. Considering that, prarabdha is anxious. Prarabdha is always trying to find the quickest possible expression. So when you have a tense spring sitting inside you, you cannot. You sit there for half an hour, then you want to do so many things. Have you noticed this? You sit for meditation, you sit like this, body tells you this is not the asana. You sit like this is not the asana. Sit like this is not the asana. Try any goddamn asana, it will tell you this is not it. Have you tried? Try to sit there for 3-4 hours, then you will see what it is. So, This is simply because there is a coiled up stuff. It has to find its way. So the best way is to get into that kind of activity that it will wear you out. By the time you go to bed, if you put your head even 2 inches before it touches the pillow, you're dead. But it's very important that the karma or the energy that is allocated for activity is expended as quickly as possible so that stillness becomes a reality, not just an idea.
So basically what's being argued here is that in order to live well, in order to, achieve, more of this state of sattvic peacefulness, you have to burn off the excess, this energy that can be directed in all kinds of unproductive pursuits. So the emphasis is on, by engaging in the yoga practice, you're going to burn off that excess energy by channeling it into these very positive activities, and simultaneously controlling behavior such that it is in this positive format. Now the next form of yoga is referred to as the yoga of knowledge, or Jnana Yoga. And here you have a much more of an emphasis, instead of being an emphasis on behaving appropriately, the emphasis is on thinking and being able to discriminate healthy thoughts from unhealthy thoughts. That's my wording of it. Essentially, the Jnana Yogi wants to understand the kind of thinking that leads people to over-identify with the ego or over-identify with the body, which are just described as delusional over-attachments. It requires that you really engage in a kind of self-analysis of your beliefs about your current state. And by giving too much importance, too much attachment, and over-identification with the body, you're buying into the delusion that the body actually matters. We'll explore similar ideas when we talk about Zen Buddhism as well. So in Jnana Yoga, what the person is seeking, they're seeking, that capital S self by using their ability to think. And that's what your authors mean by intelligent discrimination, really engaging in intensive analysis of beliefs that keep you tethered to the body and keep you tethered to your egoic thoughts. And then by doing that, by being able to discriminate which thoughts are delusion and which thoughts are open, you can transcend the delusional thoughts and leave them behind.
Now the path that we may follow through Maya in order to get to this knowledge of Brahman is called Jnana Yoga. That's just one of the paths. This is the path of knowledge, or the path to union with God through knowledge or discrimination. There are certain requirements of a student who is trying to reach Brahman through the path of knowledge. The first is viveka, discrimination between the real and the unreal. Satyasya satya, the real and the unreal. And the student has to have this quality with that he is discriminating always between these two things. The second thing that he needs is vairagya, or renunciation. He must reject what is unreal and cling only to the real. The third thing he needs are what is called the 6 treasures. These are calmness of mind and control of the senses. and the withdrawing into, away from the senses, into the self, and forbearance in all things, and faith in the words of the Guru, and steadiness of mind always. These are the 6 treasures. And after that, the other very important thing that every aspirant must have is mumukshutva, the yearning for liberation. If you have these things, you're qualified to start with Jnana Yoga. And Jnana Yoga will teach you always to be discriminating and rejecting what is unreal and going for the real.
So what you hear there is she's talking about that idea that in order to practice Jnana Yoga, it requires the ability to recognize what thoughts, what experiences are unreal, what thoughts, what experiences are real. And only by being able to discriminate between those two things can people progress and find that calmness, forbearance, faith, and steadiness of which she speaks. The next form of yoga that your authors present is the yoga of devotion, or bhakti yoga. In bhakti yoga, there is a clear emphasis on using the devotional method to transform the person. The practices are more obviously consistent with what we would consider a religious tradition. So you have worship, you have chanting, direct emphasis on communion with God within a particular faith tradition. The chanting practices in Bhakti Yoga are assumed to help people to learn to concentrate, to focus their energy, to focus the mind and the body. Again, trying to identify and suppress those waves of consciousness and channel them into the spiritual practice that allows for deeper communion with God.
What is Bhakti Yoga? Bhakti means devotion. Yoga is joining. So we join to the self within through the process of devotion. We use our mind in this case, our emotions, our heart to get back to the spirit. So what's that supposed to mean? Today our emotions are very constricted, very restricted. We have emotion, but we have it for a very small circle, a very restricted group. Bhakti Yoga is getting that restriction to go from our emotion, to feel this emotion universally, to feel pure, deep emotion everywhere, for everybody, for all living beings. To have that sense of universal identification as opposed to very exclusive kind of affection. To be able to feel for everybody, everything. The first quality of Bhakti Yoga is this kind of universal love. The second quality of Bhakti Yoga is a sense of gratitude for what we have received. To become aware of the immense bounty of nature. From the moment of birth, we have just received and received and received. And if we spent our whole life doing nothing but giving back, we would never make up for the bounty of nature, for all the oxygen we have received, for a heart that has beat, for all that has happened. We had parents to take care of us. We had gravity to keep us on earth. We have the sun to light up our lives. It's incredible. You couldn't even list down all the things we have received. In fact, the world's most unfortunate person has got more than he can ever repay. To have that sense of awareness and gratitude towards whatever we are getting, consistently getting, that's the second aspect of bhakti. The third aspect of bhakti is to feel a sense of love for something higher. That is what is called devotion. Love we feel for equals, but devotion is the same emotion, but it is towards something higher. You're devoted to God, you're devoted to your country, you're devoted to your parents, but you love your furniture, you love your pets. So the same emotion, when it's directed to something higher in life, it's known as devotion. This is the essence of bhakti, to have the sense of love and devotion and gratitude. Devotion also includes a sense of surrender. Surrender means that you recognize you don't understand something, and to that ignorance you surrender. In other words, you don't go and interfere in things you don't understand. If you're not an architect, you don't say, knock down this wall. If you're not a doctor, you don't prescribe antibiotics. Towards the things that we do not understand, we do not go and take decisions. This is the quality of surrender that goes with the quality of devotion. So these qualities are the essence of devotion. But there's a way to practice devotion as well. The practice of devotion is maybe singing bhajans, devotional songs, it may be chanting, it may be going to temples or churches or mosques. All these are practices that we do so that we get the essence of bhakti, which is the love, the gratitude, the devotion, and the surrender. That's Bhakti Yoga.
So I think the important points there are that you have an emphasis in Bhakti Yoga on love, devotion, and surrender. And it's in a very blatantly kind of spiritual context, because there is an emphasis on connection and devotion to God, to a higher power. And the practice of yoga makes that relationship more sacred. So, the emphasis on love and the connection to devotion, the gratitude, and then surrendering to what you do not know are the critical elements of Bhakti Yoga. The next form of yoga in your chapter is the yoga of sacred chanting, or mantra yoga. And as the name implies, there's a heavy reliance on the use of a mantra, or a phrase or syllable, that is assumed to have some power to focus the mind on openness to the spiritual. Mantras are designed to alter consciousness, so to help the person to achieve a meditative state and a shift in consciousness. Mantras can be used individually, they can be used in groups, but the goal remains the same, is to transform the state of consciousness, to make it meditative and allow the person to therefore be more open to the spiritual experience. The repetition of mantras are often described in terms of cosmic vibration. Whatever terminology you want to use, the goal is to shift consciousness into a space where the person is more able to suppress those waves of consciousness that keep us tethered to the current here and now, and then to render the self open to a transpersonal experience. Om is probably a phrase or a syllable that you are familiar with as being associated with chanting. Om is probably the most recognized, frequently used mantra that you see coming out of the culture in India. There are others. There are many others. So traditionally, mantras are assumed to be effective only when they are being initiated by trained people, by, you know, initiated yogis. So people who have been engaged in the practice, and who have through their discipline, have a capacity to use their mantras in such a way that they can achieve that meditative state and move into a different form of consciousness.
Hi, I'm Joey Miles, and in this short session, it's designed for yoga students to learn the opening Ashtanga Yoga mantra. This is taken from a text by Shankaracharya called the Yoga Taravali, the first verse, and it goes like this. So I'll chant the Om, you can join in with me, and then I'll chant one line. I'll repeat that line a second time, so when you're using this and listening, you join in with it the second time. So you can hear, you have a chance to listen, and then repeat, the way we often learn. Okay? It's very simple, it goes like this. Vande Gurunam Charanarvinde, Vande Gurunam Charanarvinde, Sandara Shita Svatma Sukha Vabodhe, Sandara Shita Svatma Sukha Vabodhe, Nisharayase Jangaryaka Yamarne, Nisharayase Jangaryaka Yamarne, Samsara Hala Hala Moha Shantiye, Samsara Hala Hala Moha Shantiye, Abahu Purushakaram, Abahu Purushakaram, Shankachakra Siddharinam, Shankachakra Siddharinam, Sahasra Shirasam Shviyatam, Sahasra Shirasam Shviyatam, Pranamami Patanjalim, Pranamami Patanjalim.
So that's an example of a mantra being used for meditative purposes. And you notice how you would have to learn it. And before you can, the assumption is, before you can experience the meditative benefit of mantra yoga, it requires practice up front. You have to learn the ritual, you learn the chant, and then engaging in it repetitiously can produce that meditative outcome. And that concludes part 2 of my coverage of yoga and the Hindu tradition.